Welcome to Introduction to the Enneagram. My name is Evan Turner. I'm the founder of Ennealab, a Nashville-based company dedicated to making the Enneagram accessible to individuals and organizations interested in self-development. I'm very excited to be partnering with the Jung platform on this experience and very excited to introduce you to work that I love so much as the Enneagram. So I'll share that I have a private practice here in Nashville where I work with individuals, couples, and families, as well as executive leadership teams. I'm currently pursuing a master's in clinical counseling with a specialization in working with military and veteran populations. And in this introduction that I want to share with you, we'll be covering many of the basics, kind of the basic principles of the Enneagram, a little bit about the history of this teaching tradition, some terminology that you'll want to be familiar with. And then I'll share my recommendations for further study before we move into class 2, 3, and 4, where we'll begin to unpack each of the 9 types. So I fell very much in love with this system because it hit so close to home in a literal sense for me. So I became very passionate about this work. I went on to study with the individual who co-authored that book, a man named Russ Hudson, who's a dear friend and colleague of mine. In 2018, many years later, after devouring any book I could get my hands on, I ended up certifying both as a teacher and a practitioner with an organization called the Narrative Enneagram, which is in the Bay Area, and was founded by 2 academics who you'll hear me talk about later. Helen Palmer, who's a wonderful contributor to the Enneagram as we know it today, and her colleague, Dr. David Daniels, who is a professor and teacher of psychiatry at Stanford University Medical School. So I serve on their organization, which they co-founded on the board of directors and as a faculty member. And in 2020, prior to COVID locking down the world as we know it, I had been operating as an educator in the prison system where I worked both with incarcerated individuals and with the corrections personnel responsible for them. So I also began operating as a law enforcement, as a consultant to law enforcement agencies, rather. And I share that just to illustrate the great adaptability of the Enneagram, to have very meaningful and relevant conversations with individuals in all walks of life in every context. So why the Enneagram? Well, I'll share a quote from Dr. David Daniels, who I mentioned earlier. He had a really wonderful career, was very well respected as a practicing psychiatrist and academic. And he said of all the treatment modalities he had worked with and tried out across his therapeutic career, nothing came close to helping couples heal their hearts and relax their defenses as much as when he used a comprehensive application of the Enneagram. So particularly in the narrative school, which David founded and which I'm representing, there is a focus on this integration of mind, body, and heart. And we hold that the pathway to integration happens through working in 3 very crucial spheres. The psychological, we want to be aware of our patterns of thinking and believing. The spiritual, kind of how do we connect with our own capacity to change and develop? And the somatic, how do we work at the level of felt sensation to bring ourselves into greater balance and a greater sense of well-being? Now, you can work on each of these spheres separately and get a lot of great work done. But we really believe that bringing these 3 pieces together intentionally and with awareness is where we get the maximum benefit. All mammals have 3 aversive reactions when 3 basic needs are not met. Okay? So in the body center, types 8, 9, and 1, the emotion that's often associated with this group is anger. And what we see in the mammalian kingdom is that anger shows up when a boundary's been crossed, when you've been exposed to maltreatment or your needs have been denied, or there's kind of a violation of self on some level, okay? Heart types types 2, 3, and 4, the emotion that's closely associated with this is sometimes called grief, or shame is another word that you'll hear used. And basically in the animal kingdom, we kind of think about this in terms of distress at lack of contact. Okay, so connection fails for any reason. There's almost like a panic response in the individual. So we associate that with the heart types. In the thinking types, types 5, 6, and 7, or the mind center, the emotion that we associate with this is fear, or sometimes we say anxiety. And fear comes up for all of us when we're under threat, or there's a sense of basic insecurity, or a basic kind of rupture to trust. So it'll be interesting. This will be part of our kind of homework to unpack what is my relationship to each of these 3 core emotional experiences. So I often say what saved us as a kid tends to not serve us very well as an adult. The focus here is on understanding this with a lot of compassion, being able to observe our patterns and meet that with some kindness. And really the emphasis here in terms of the way that we teach the Enneagram is a non-pathological approach to personality. Okay, so those of you who might be familiar with the 12-step programs, you probably heard this before, but what can be learned can be unlearned. And this is a very gentle practice with which we want to relax our type structure, not go to war with it. Okay, Carl Jung is famous for having said, what you resist not only persists, it grows in size. So we don't want to go to war with the ego, even though that's a very popular saying in the world we live in today. A great little illustration of this that I want to share, I was gifted with by my first teacher, Russ Hudson, and I like to share this with groups. The idea, which I just kind of illustrated, is that you come into the world like this, and you're hardwired, right, in your makeup as perhaps a body type, a heart type, or a head type. Okay, that's the nature piece. And you're wide open and undefended the way that children are. You're highly receptive to the world around you. You might not be able to understand everything the way that an adult can, but you're often picking up on a lot of very subtle information around you. Perhaps you landed in a family that's very loving and well-meaning, but isn't perfect. There's no such thing, okay? Even really loving parents drop the ball sometimes. But let's say that this little individual landed in an environment where mom and dad argued a lot. And perhaps over time, there's, financial stressors. There certainly was in my family. And maybe mom and dad hit the point of irreconcilable differences. They separated. As a little kid, you have to move to a new home or a new school environment. You're the new kid in class. Other kids pick on you, right? So this is the nature piece. What is the conditions of our nurturing, rather? The idea is that because kids can't just pack up and move or set and assert boundaries, what we believe happens is an internal contraction against the pain that we experience or against anything we perceive as potentially dangerous or fearful or scary. Okay, this happens psychologically in a pattern of thinking and belief or an identification, how we perceive the world to be. It happens emotionally, which is this kind of emotional passion or vice of our type. And it even happens physiologically. So you can even notice when you get stressed, the tension tends to land in a consistent place in your own body, right? There are different muscular tension patterns associated with each of these 9 types. There's a different breathing pattern that comes online during stress. So we have to tune in also to the body. And that's one thing that makes the Enneagram different from other personality typologies out there, is that it actually brings in a physiological component. So the point of knowing that isn't to just give yourself a label, okay? Labels never changed anyone's life. The point of knowing this is that we develop the ability to observe this contraction happening in us in the moment, right? And instead of allowing our personality habits to kind of sweep us into an autopilot state and make all of our decisions for us, we hit the pause button. And we hit the pause button, which feels very awkward in the moment. We hit the pause button to do something very counterinstinctual, which is to relax. In moments where we typically brace for impact, or we move to defend ourselves, or we get, bossy and assertive, if we can hit the pause button and practice kind of self-regulating in each of these three centers, body, heart, mind, we develop or recover, rather, the ability to meet life from a much more present, open-hearted, open-minded place.